One of the things that strikes me about the Indian urban process and Indian city development is that how chaotic and how terrible it is. But what is interesting at the same time to me is that if you take any indices of living in the cities, whether it is to do with access to water, access to electricity, access to transport and everything, it's actually been improving all the time. And when I think about that is that, look, if that can happen with the really terrible way that we were administering things, where there hasn't really been any particularly intelligent planning and so on, but yet you can have relatively positive results in the sense that things kept on improving actually. If we can improve the process of urbanization and also the management and planning of cities to the extent that we can, presumably there's much more we can do for better cities, which to me means inclusion. So I think that, and this the whole issue that, look, we are now around, we don't yet have the census results, but my guess would be we will be somewhere near 30% urbanized, not much more than that, although some people had expected to be much more than that. I'll remind you, one of the interesting things, again, this to do with inclusion, exclusion, is that almost all projections that were made between 1980 and 2000, for 2001, were for 30% urbanization level in 2001. Almost all. Between 81, 91 and 91, 2001, there was a slowdown in urbanization. There was a slowdown in migration in particular. And that meant lots of people were being excluded because there was something wrong going on in our urbanization process. Many people, and at the same time, again, what was puzzling was that almost any other urbanization process, when the economic growth accelerates, which it undoubtedly did in the 80s and 90s, and now in the 2000s, that urbanization starts accelerating. We had the opposite experience. To my knowledge, this hasn't happened anywhere else in the world. I may be wrong on that, but I have not found any. So that is something that is of great concern, and that is an exclusionary process. The first issue to me about inclusion is city development or urbanization process which is employment generating. And to my mind, among the key issues there is to do with manufacturing employment growth. Keep celebrating our service revolution, but we don't somehow we don't like the idea of making things. Another statistic on that actually is that we have about the highest merchandise trade deficit as a proportion of GDP in the world, of between 8 and 10% of GDP for the last 3 or 4 years. Roberta, I think it's 3 years, if not. And actually it's been increasing consistently. It's about 10% now, which means that the import of goods that we do exceeds the export of goods that we do by 10% of GDP. That's huge. And that tells you how little we are making, both for domestic consumption as well as for export. Even New York still has manufacturing. As I said, when you go to Singapore or Hong Kong and so on, many of the buildings that you see are actually factories, not residential apartments. The second issue is then, to my mind, access to essential urban services, which means really water supply, sanitation, and transport. Just 10% of the total projected investment in both the reports. You can do 100% protected water supply, sanitation, and sewerage. What that will do to the health of everyone, the daily welfare of everyone, would be incredible. On health and education, we don't even think about the urban health services, urban education services. One of the things, again, that strikes me in traveling around the world is we probably have the most perfectly income stratified educational system. I don't know any major country in the world which doesn't have basically similar provisions for free secondary education for everyone. We have the most stratified, and that's a major measure of exclusion.